From Tumwater, Washington, going out to the 5 counties and beyond, No Shhh, it's the TRL Podcast. I'm Chris, your perfectly adequate podcast host and sometimes librarian. Happy to be back for episode 2, and obviously still employed. But I am talking to my direct supervisor today, so the pressure is still very much on. They tell me that if I do this long enough, I will eventually get to talk to somebody who can't fire me, but for now, I guess we'll keep the swear words to a minimum. And keeping tabs on me today is my co-host and perfectly willing podcast participant, Annalisa. Welcome, Annalisa.
Hi, Chris. I'm going to say perfectly willing is maybe a stretch, but happy to be here nonetheless. And I want to point out that we did get a comment online that you are more than perfectly adequate. So just going to say that.
I'll stick with that adjective for now.
So tell me who we are talking to today and what episode 2 is about.
Today we're going to be talking about our youth spaces. We will chit-chat about some TikToks, discuss A Sunken Ship in Shelton, and answer that most pressing of library questions these days. Why is it so loud in here?
Okay, let's get into it.
All right, we're here with Kendra Jones. Kendra is our Deputy Director here at Timberland, a position in which she gets to make all sorts of very important and universally popular decisions. Isn't that right, Kendra?
Yes, that's very accurate.
And we invited Kendra because she has an extensive background in youth and family services. So extensive, in fact, that I could not possibly summarize it myself, but she is sitting right here and can do that herself. So, Kendra, how about our resume rundown?
Sure. So I started my career as a children's librarian, specializing in early learning in particular. And I did that for about 12 years before becoming the youth and family services coordinator here at Timberland Regional Library. So I left the front lines for some administrative kind of behind the scenes work where I got to help other people do all that great work and the front lines using my expertise in youth services and early learning. So I did that for a few years, and then I decided I wanted to be the deputy director and make all those really popular decisions. Yeah.
We had the idea for this episode after some TikToks were going around. There was some discussion out in the social media world about indoor playgrounds. Is that appropriate for libraries? What's the library's role in offering those sorts of things to communities? And as with any sort of discourse online, people are either vehemently opposed to it or highly in favor of it. So we thought we'd talk about how Timberland approaches that. And obviously we have some opinions because we have improved our youth spaces across the district in recent years. So that's the topic of discussion. One of the TikToks actually refers to some libraries in our area. Our neighbors to the east in Spokane have some really interesting play spaces, they call them there. They're thematic, and they have what is basically a small indoor playground. And as I understand it, Kendra, you're going out to Spokane with some staff here at Timberland to tour and look at those spaces in April. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, so the playscapes, I think is actually what they're calling them in Spokane. Mm-hmm. And it's a newer thing to them. And we want to model that idea. And also from my experience working in other libraries where we've had basically miniature children's museums and other play areas, this has been something that's near and dear to my heart. And coming to Timberland, I realized that we had a real lack of play spaces. We had toys, but they weren't developmentally appropriate for a range of ages of children and families who would be coming into the library. So I could answer the one question about whether or not we are, as Timberland, are pro or against play spaces. The official, tack that we're taking is we are pro play spaces for a variety of reasons.
Spoiler alert, pro.
So I guess we could just leave now. No, we've settled that debate.
All done.
All done. We are going to check out Spokane's. We're trying to get as many ideas as possible to infuse our spaces. We have so many tiny libraries and some larger libraries. So obviously we need to gather ideas for what could work in each space because there's not a one-size-fit-all for play spaces in libraries.
Are you going to be sneaking around there, or are you going to be taking a tour with some of their staff?
Well, I have not arranged it yet, but I'm hoping that the staff will give us a tour. I'm sure they will. I know some folks in Spokane, and I'm sure that they will be happy to show us
Spokane
around.
Folks, if you're listening, you are obligated to give our staff a tour of your play spaces.
You now have to.
Yes. I wanted you to ask them when you go, because on the website, they definitely use the term play spaces, and I have to consciously stop and say play spaces instead of play places, which is the other, of course, well-known indoor playground of sorts. I wondered if they chose that terminology specifically.
I will ask them.
Right?
I'm curious about that too. They might have. It's just close enough to be recognizable. Yeah.
So they're very cool, and we'll probably touch on those a little bit later in this. But the main debate that I had seen when I was looking at some of these posts on social media is kind of about the tension between what are often referred to as your traditional library users, people who want the library to be a quiet space for books and reading and shushing, and other community members who are really enthusiastic about, a place to bring their kids that's necessarily going to be louder and more active. And I think obviously we've spoiled it already. We are pro play space. So I thought maybe we could speak to that a little bit too, because our library is supposed to be about books and reading and shushing, and the short answer is no. But for the longer answer, Kendra?
Yeah. So sure, yes, on books and reading, no on the shushing. So it's a little bit of everything. I think it's important for us to think about historically libraries. It's really recent that children were even really welcomed into library spaces. So you could be there if you were not heard or seen, and you could check out materials. But it's actually only been a few decades that children could actually be in spaces interacting and doing their thing. So we have to think about that. Historically, we've evolved in a lot of with libraries, but it's not that we haven't been living with this for a really long time. So I think that what we're struggling with is it's a new idea for very many what we call traditional library users, but I want to reframe that to say it's probably more like long-term library users. Right. They've maybe seen libraries before they were what they are now. And I think it's important to acknowledge that that's a change. We are definitely changing people, their idea of what libraries are. So I want to acknowledge that it is a change. It's not always been this way. But I think that libraries have always been known as institutions of learning in some way, shape, or form. So maybe it was research, you're looking for your dissertation or whatever. It could also be that once upon a time librarians were the ones finding you those lyrics that you just couldn't remember for a song. So we're a space of information, of knowledge. We've always been that way. But as we've learned more about how people learn, how our learning standards have evolved, what we know now children need to know in order to be successful in life, that has all changed. We used to be all about reading, writing, and arithmetic. You need to sit down, be quiet, study, do your thing, and that was how you were going to learn and be a great citizen. And now there's been buckets of research to show that is not the case, actually, that children learn best through play. Play is a child's work. Some of you might have heard that phrase thrown around before. That is so very true. That's how they're going to learn. And so we look at that and say, well, libraries have spaces that are open for everyone. They're free. They're accessible. Come on in. So wouldn't we be a great space to help children on that learning adventure, to get to where they need to be successful? We have the space. Yes, it costs money, as somebody has pointed out in one of the online debates, but it's a one-time thing to make, a space really great. That's a one-time big ticket item. And if we can spend that money once, aside from maintenance costs, and really make a community, have this thriving learning environment for young children, isn't that great? I think that's a really awesome thing that we can contribute, because what other institution is going to do it? Especially in the Northwest, where we have, 8 months, it's rainy.
Yeah, that's one of the points that was made online. It's shouldn't this be like a Parks and Rec thing? In terms of our weather situation here, it's some combination of cold and dark and wet, 8 months out of the year in Southwest Washington. So bringing it indoors and bringing it in the library just made natural sense to me. So I can understand different areas of the country. Maybe this is a more salient debate, but for us, I think it makes perfect sense. So. Mm-hmm. And you're right about obviously some library users are going to remember their time in college, and you're going to go to a college or university library, there's not going to be a whole lot of play places there. So there are certainly different types of libraries, but for a public library, this makes natural sense to me. Of course, in my lifetime, it's been like this to one degree or another. There have been toys, story times, activities, and we're just really leaning into that in recent years, in my experience.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think that's the thing, is we've come a long way in the last, 20 years in Timberland, but Timberland is still a little bit behind as far as those play spaces. So other libraries I've worked in, we've had those play spaces for 10 to 20 years already, and Timberland's just kind of getting into it, which is probably why it feels like such a big change for us here.
Well, and something that I've heard you speak on before is taking into account what resources are already available to a community when you're thinking about what resources, what kind of things we need to offer our communities and our libraries is that, you're looking at what does the community have to offer as far as indoor spaces for children. So I wonder if you could talk about that, the type of thought that goes into what our different communities across our 5 counties actually need in their libraries.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That's a great point. Yeah, so we have a lot of really rural library communities communities where there's a library, and around that library, there aren't many services. It's not like Olympia where we've got a lot of preschools. We have a lot of regular schools. We've got museums, Hands-On Children's Museum. We've got all these really great resources in Olympia. But if you go out to, say, Westport, where we're going to be doing some fun play spaces, that starts to be a lot different. There's not really an outdoor, easy outdoor space for kids to play in. And again, the weather, there's not an indoor space aside from school. So that means we don't have a lot of resources available to young children. And a question that I've been asked before is, well, how about the older population? A lot of these communities that we have, they are a majority of people over 50. Like when we look at the demographics, there's an older population there, and that's great. And a lot of these folks use our libraries, and that's wonderful. And I don't think they're going to stop using our libraries just because we also provide something for the very young children. But that older population tends to also have senior centers and other community centers and other things that they can do. They have the option to go places that children can't go, whereas children they have to have somebody take them somewhere. So if we're going to make it worth it to come to the library, like we have to make it worth it to come to the library, right? And we need a really cool play space where I hope a caregiver is waking up on a dreary morning and saying, what am I going to do with this kid today? What are we going to do? I know, the library. That will entertain them for a few hours. And that's what I want. And that's going to lead us also to that reading, that love of literacy and reading, because the books and the materials are also there. And I feel like if kids grow up saying, I spent all my weekends in the library, this is only a good thing for society. Like I see a future that is bright if that's the case. Because again, otherwise they're going to say, oh, I spent all my weekends maybe at the beach, which is also great, but the beaches are not going away. They don't really require our funding necessarily, where libraries do.
It's funny that you mentioned senior centers too, because I've been to some senior centers as far doing outreach for the library in the past, and they're not exactly quiet spaces either. Mm-hmm. You go to the senior center on lunch, it's kind of a party. So
well, and talk about bingo night. I mean,
yeah, there you go. Even more rowdy.
What you were saying kind of reminded me of the West Olympia Library, which over the past year doubled in size and also had this kind of big refresh that really part of the expansion was about making this really enhanced children's area that has like a giant light bright and just a lot of really unique features that have enhanced the space. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the thought process about that.
Yeah, great. And, the other reason that the West Olympia Library is great is because it's in a mall. And so I think that also helps us break that stereotype of like libraries can't be in cool, vibrant, loud places. We can be because we're in a mall. And that was really a big impetus behind choosing West Olympia and that location was to see how receptive they would be to a library in that space. And they've been very receptive. It's one of our busiest branches. Yeah, by far. I mean, it really is. It's climbing up there. So in thinking about that space, we knew that people would come from all of the counties. People come to the mall from Grays Harbor, from Lewis County, from everywhere, not just Thurston County. So that was a big piece of it. And again, they're coming, they want to do something with their kids or their whole family, and the library provides that. So we really wanted to try out some cool, fun, loud things. And that's a question we got with West Olympia was, can I bring my child who's really loud into the space? And the answer was yes. We don't really have rules on loud. It's about being disruptive. So as long as you can use the space, and you can be as noisy as you want, but you're developmentally noisy, right? So kids are shrieking because they're happy to be there, or they're talking with each other. Same with adults, you're having conversations. That's all great. And that's the kind of volume that we're looking for in a library. We want this to be a community connection space. Now, if you're having an argument or a fight, or there's a scream that's a pain scream, those are the things that library staff are going to be paying attention to, because that goes into that disruptive area. We need to do something about that. We need to make sure the space is safe and that it's welcoming for everybody. But the noise level is not really the indicator of that always. It's the kind of noise, the kind of thing you need to be there to know, is this good or is this not good? And our staff are really good at determining those things. So we still welcome people. Like, don't worry about if you think you've got a rowdy child or whatever, like bring them on in, and I guarantee you that they'll be fine.
Yeah, when we were chatting about this beforehand, you made an interesting point, which is that typically, kids can obviously be disruptive themselves, but typically it's the adults who are disruptive in one way or another, and not usually the kids. So in my experience, that's very true. I have to talk to probably 90% more adults than I do kids about being quiet in the library or not doing something disruptive. It's usually the kids who are well behaved, and when they're excited, calm down relatively quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And I find that kids are more in the destructive realm of things, like because they're little scientists, they're trying to figure out like, how can I break this thing? So we see a lot more of that, like with our physical play spaces. I have to think about when we're designing that, we always have to think about it being childproof and that I don't want them ripping it apart. And, adults don't tend to do that as much, although of course adults still have their fair share of breaking things. But they do tend to be more disruptive in that, like, having loud arguments and, sometimes yelling at their kids, things like that, that's going to be a disruption that we're going to need to talk to them about and set those boundaries. But the noise level for kids, unless they're hurt, is usually fine.
The destructive aspect is a good point, though, because the toys that we buy and the spaces that, we're building, they're industrial strength for that reason. So that's why this stuff, costs a reasonable amount of money, is because this is meant to handle the abuse of 10 or 20 toddlers a day. So I've always been impressed by that. The things that we build and the toys that we buy are not just kind of like off the shelf, your play school toys or whatever. They're industrially made library strength toys.
Yes, exactly. And when we do buy some of those, kind of play school toys, but we always have a replacement plan in place because those ones won't hold up as long. So you have to know that if I'm going to buy something that you might find just in a preschool, which is a more contained environment, yes, it's going to have to hold up to some grime and use and things. But in a public library, we're seeing way bigger volume than a smaller preschool is. And so I'm going to have to cycle those out. In fact, one of the things that we're building at Shelton, or that I guess will be built by the time you all see this, is a ship. And during that construction of the ship, the facilities staff here would tell you the number of times I said, okay, but can a 6-year-old break that? Is that sturdy enough that when they hang on this, and they would say, hang on it, they're not going to climb on this. Yes, they will. They will absolutely climb on it. So we do think a lot about that when we're building these spaces. Developmentally, where are kids and what will they do to the space? That's our main thing when we're developing, especially indoor spaces. Is it safe? Will they destroy it?
Is it easy to clean?
Is it easy to clean?
The first thing that I thought of when I saw the Spokane, one of them has a twisty slide. And I was like, someone is eventually going to have to clean the barf out of that twisty slide.
Yeah.
And it's going to be library staff, because that's what we do. We clean everything. But these things better be easy to clean. It's like, this is why we aren't installing ball pits at any of the libraries. You don't sanitize a ball pit.
No, you do not sanitize a ball pit. I would love to have a ball pit, but that's why we don't.
I mean, ball pits are fun. Don't get me wrong. I was going straight for the ball pit as a kid at Chuck E. Cheese, but I'm not also asking staff to clean a ball pit.
No, that would take way too long. And that's the thing with like the slides and things like that. Everything we have is cleanable. But truly, I mean, if you ask any children's librarian, how many times have you cleaned up puke or poop or pee? It's a lot.
I'm not even a children's librarian. Never have been. I've only been children adjacent, if anything. And I've done my share of cleanup. We all have our barf stories. So maybe that's another episode.
Podcast.
That's another episode.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge that we have for staff is the maintenance of the space, making sure that it's staying in shape. And I know certainly when I worked for the Vancouver Public Library in Vancouver, Washington, that has this 1,400 square foot early learning space, that was a really big challenge. We had to have staff rotating that, making sure that it stayed clean, and nothing in any of our libraries is to that scale. But the ship is going to be to that level. And I've already talked to staff about that. We've got a little plan in place for their checks and things to make sure that they're ready for the extra work that is going to be coming their way. But again, I think that the benefits far outweigh it.
I want to hear more about the ship.
Okay, we can talk more about the ship.
Well, and the bigger conversation of, we're going to see more of these enhanced children's spaces come up, but the ship is a really good example of one that's right on the horizon. So what can you tell us about this sunken ship that's at Shelton?
So it's a sunken ship and it's at Shelton. I can tell you that. It's huge. So it's something like 26 feet long by 17 feet wide, I think is the dimensions. I'm probably getting that wrong, but close enough to give you the idea of how huge it is. So it's a structure that our staff built, which is huge because it's a giant cost savings. It would normally something like that would cost around probably $200,000 to have installed and built if we were to order it from an external company, and it's probably going to cost us less than $50,000 for sure. I don't know the exact numbers yet, but that's a big difference. So we can put this really cool space.
Our facility staff are very good at this.
Yes, they are amazing. They built something in our Ilwaco library. So that's another space that we have our custom built reading fort. That's really great. And we wanted to scale up from that. Can we do something bigger? And yes, the answer was yes. So they built us a ship. It's got a little reading nook in there. So we definitely have captured that literacy element that we hear so many of our community members say, like, we want to really focus on the literacy part of libraries. And so there's a reading nook built right into the ship. But I've also got manipulatives for physical development, motor skills, early learning skills to help you learn how to write, things like that. It's all infused into this space. So as children go through it and caregivers are going through with their children, they should be able to really see, like, all these things are developmentally appropriate. These are things that kids would like to play with. And we hope the biggest thing, of course, is they're going to come down the stairs at Shelton. They're going to see this ship, and that will be forever imprinted on them. These are those core memories that they're making, and forevermore, they will think that Shelton Library is the coolest place in the universe. And that's really what we're going for with something that big, is that library love. We want them to keep coming back and discovering new things.
Well, and I don't know Shelton really well, but I don't know that they have that many indoor spaces like that. And, kind of speaking to what you were talking about earlier is, say that you're assessing a community's needs, and this is not true of Shelton, but of other communities, they have an older community. But shouldn't we still be trying to usher in this next generation of library users? And like you said, creating these core memories that make them want to return to the library, which is, a great space for them to be and to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge impetus to what we do. And you're right, Shelton is not on that spectrum of like an older community. Lots of kids in Shelton, which is another reason why we want to do it, is because it is actually a really huge community for young children, especially. Like the percentage of kids who, children in that community are like 25% of the community or something like that is children, which is really big. So it makes sense that we would have something really spectacular there in the library. And you're right, there are not a lot of indoor spaces. There are some in Shelton, certainly more than some of our smaller communities, but not that are completely free. There's a charge somewhat associated with it.
And that's huge too. And that's a topic that I love exploring, is the idea of third places and free third places. Or is it third spaces?
Third places. Third places?
It could be both.
You know what is third place? Because there's third place books. There's third place Starbucks concept. Third place, it's third place.
Right. I love that topic, and I love the idea of libraries being those places, because can you have a third place if it's not free? I mean, you can, but it's a barrier for people to come and to enjoy it. And
Absolutely.
So these spaces for families that are free, I think that's a game changer.
Yeah, I would argue that it's not really a third place if you have to buy something to be there.
And I think that's the thing, the Starbucks and other pay-to-play, if you will, places, I think they're going for that third place. They're trying to actually borrow that idea from libraries. So I got my library degree in 2008. And at that time, we were talking a lot about third place and how the library fills that need, because it is a public space and it is oftentimes the only free space in a community. That's it. And especially I bring this up all the time when I'm doing early learning trainings, but for ages 0 to 2, the library is usually, just definitively, it is the only free indoor space for children 0 to 2. So you can't take any kinds of classes, you can't go to the doctor, you can't do anything else without paying from age 0 to 2. Once they get a little older, then there's free preschool options, there's, subsidies that exist out there. But until that point, we are it. And that's another thing that keeps me going with these play spaces, because again, that's a third place for a demographic that literally has no other options in their community. And we can fulfill that need. So why wouldn't we, is kind of the argument that I've been making. And especially because all of our staff, they are all very well trained in early childhood development and youth development. They know what is really good for kids to help them engage with the library, to learn, to be great citizens. They've really been, studying that, been trained in that. And so great, let's bring the kids then into the space. And we also, of course, will take the staff out to them as well. But for the kids who can make it in, let's make it really special.
Yeah, look forward to a future episode with one of our early learning coordinators who will speak more about the importance of early literacy. So
yes,
I've already got that queued up.
I'm excited about that.
Well, and I wanted to mention, I was in the Lacey Library at one of the story times, and there was a mother and a toddler, and I had been at a few story times that week. I had been at Tumwater, I had been Olympia, and I realized I had recognized this parent, this grown-up, from all these different story times. And I talked with her, and she said, my family can't afford preschool. So I actually go to all of the story times in our area, and it kind of fills this need of, socialization, of, access to reading. And I just thought that was so beautiful that she's really lucky that she lives in, there's 3 different libraries that she can, and actually more. But that fills a void for families who can't afford that really early preschool. And that's something that libraries are providing for families.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's part of the place-based piece as well, is that if you come to Storytime, then think about it afterwards. You get this, very structured program, and then you can go play. And so there's like 2 to 3 hours of your day that are really rich in development for your young child. Like that's a really great thing to have in your community, and it's all free. So again, coming back to why I'm pro these spaces, it's that, and I honestly, in my experience too, like I don't get that many complaints. I never did get that many complaints from traditional library users. I think you could see them as a complaint, but a lot of times they're more questions. This is new to them. And so they were asking, why is it so loud in here?
Yeah,
is this
exactly
what we're doing? And so it's the thing I tell folks is just explain it to them. And most of the time, you'll have a 1 or 2 that never are going to come around, but most of the time they go, oh, that totally makes sense. I understand now. And oftentimes that will also lead them to engaging in the space as well. Oh, wow, this is so cool. They'll go talk to the grownups that are, the caregivers that are in the space with the kids and ask them, what are you playing with? Can I, join in? Things like that. So it's an intergenerational learning opportunity as well.
And staff are always pretty accommodating with that as well. Like, depending on the size of the library that you're at, whether it has a meeting room space. When we talk to folks who are upset about the volume level or don't understand why we have these places for play in the library, we'll give them strategies. Like anyone can reserve a meeting room for any purpose. Some branches have study rooms that you can drop in and use that are going to be quieter, a space kind of away from the activity. And even the busiest branches have quieter times during the week. So if you show up on a Saturday morning when family story time has just let out in downtown Olympia, it's going to be loud. But we can suggest other days of the week, a Wednesday evening when it's going to be a lot quieter. So if that's your jam, if you want to come and read and study and have a more quiet experience, we can certainly help you out and tell you when to come and visit the library for that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Our staff are very skilled in doing that. There's usually our downtimes. Every library has that lull and the staff know when it is. And so if you need that quiet space, try to come in during that time or just embrace the noise. Bring some earbuds.
Embrace the noise.
Embrace the noise.
Be born with hearing loss. Turn your hearing aids off. That's what I do, by the way. Well, this has been great. The other question that has not yet come up is what other libraries in Timberland can we expect to see have some improvements to their youth spaces in the near future?
Well, all of them will have improvements eventually. So I don't have necessarily a timeline of which libraries are going to come next, but I'd already mentioned Westport. Westport's getting an improvement for sure. And our early learning coordinator, who you'll be hearing from in another podcast, is actually undergoing a youth spaces audit this year. So she will be going around to each library with some help, looking at their youth space and developing a plan with the managers and the staff in those locations on what we're going to do in those spaces. So some of the libraries, they're already done. Like Ilwaco, we have just remodeled that. Shelton, it's going to be done. So there's a few that won't have any more work done on them. But pretty much all the others, there's going to be a little bit of tweaking. It might just be refresh of toys, but it also could be some of these really great bigger structures that we're going to build. And that's certainly happening in Westport. They're going to have a custom built structure, and Salcombe will also have a custom built structure. Those are two that we know of for sure. And of course, we're not going to tell you anything about that. You'll just have to wait and see.
Our operations staff have really volunteered themselves for this. That's what they get for being good at it.
They're so good at it.
They started off making book drops for us in Olympia during the pandemic, and they did such a good job on that. Now they're building sunken ships and who knows what else. So
Yeah.
I have to imagine that they love doing that.
they must.
That has to be fun work. If you're going to be building something, I mean, building a shipwreck, that has to be a good project.
That
Certainly
is
more exciting than building 10 cubes to put
Exactly.
books in. Yeah.
cute.
Exactly.
I think they really do love it. And honestly, every time I talk to them, the ones that in particular do most of the building, they say they really enjoy that creative outlet, that it gives them an opportunity to really, think creatively. And you can imagine when your job is, doing courier, taking books from one place to another, fixing light bulbs, painting. There's not a whole lot of creativity in like that kind of work. And so I think they have these really great skills, and we've given them an opportunity to share their creative skills. So it's really kind of a great internal growth, development opportunity for some of our staff, in addition to being really great for the public. So it's been a win-win for us.
Exactly. Well, kudos to them for doing an excellent job.
Yeah, they do really great work.
We've given kind of the long answer to the question of, are libraries quiet? Should libraries have place? We've given a very long answer. I think I like kind of a succinct answer. And one that I often give people is, aren't libraries supposed to be quiet? Which is that libraries are community hubs. And what you were just describing, there are depending on the library, there usually are quiet study spaces. There are quieter times to visit. There are meeting rooms that you can reserve. So it's not that libraries are always noisy, or certain sections are always noisy. I think saying that libraries are a community hub is a really good way to wrap it up, and that there are quiet spaces, but they're not going to be quiet.
The community is loud, and we are a community hub.
I say our libraries are vibrant because our communities are vibrant.
Exactly.
That's much more elegant than what I was saying.
I think that's perfect.
That's why you're here.
You just said it right there. It's true, though. I mean, our libraries are community hubs. They're vibrant. Our communities are vibrant. Our libraries are vibrant. I think that's a great way to say it, Annalisa. I can't even think of anything else to add to that.
Well, and I think it sums up just many stereotypes and outdated, these default images that we have of the library. Vibrant is a word that I use a lot when I talk about the library, because I think it does away with this outdated idea of what the library used to be. We evolve. Our community's needs have changed. So
we change with we are community organizations where we are funded literally by the community, and so we change with the community. When the community changes, their needs change, they tell us they need different things, we are going to evolve, or we will no longer exist. And we wouldn't deserve to exist if we refuse to evolve with the community, because what would be the point of being a community funded organization that doesn't do what the community needs or wants? It just doesn't make sense. So we do have to keep up with that. And I want to touch too, because we have been talking about play spaces in libraries, but I think you actually bring a good point that our communities are evolving. And so they aren't coming into a physical space as much. So we're still doing all these play spaces because those who, first of all, it does bring more people in, but people who do come in and are used to doing that, they deserve those spaces. However, we know that transportation is a barrier. Not everyone is going to be able to come into the library, but that does not make them any less deserving of the riches that library services can provide. So we do also mimic some like miniature play type, I wouldn't say spaces, but the model of play is woven through everything that we do as a library. So when we go out with Anywhere Library, our mobile services vehicles go out, they have that kind of play attitude. They bring manipulatives with them that are developmentally appropriate, that are exciting for people. When we go out and do story times in preschools and Head Starts, ECAPs, we're bringing that same idea of like, hey, this is loud, this is vibrant, this is exciting. This is not sit down and be quiet and listen to 3 long stories. This is an engaging, exciting. There are bubbles, there are scarves, there's parachutes, there's things like that are happening out in the community for those who can't come in. So we are really trying to spread out all of that kind of idea of, the libraries are, my goal has been to change the idea of libraries. We are not coming in to read a book, we are places to play and explore and connect with community. So we are community connection spaces. Fun fact, when I wrote my last paper for my master's degree, I said that by this time, libraries would be that we would mostly be connection spaces. There'd be a de-emphasis on physical print materials. And I got a C on that paper because my professor did not think that would ever happen. She was convinced there would always be books forever. And so I like to say, like, the proof is in the pudding. Like, we see the statistics going down on our physical materials, but going up on the visiting of, like, actually being physically in the space. Like, we're seeing more people in those spaces. So I think that tells you what the community wants.
Kendra's professor, if you're listening to this podcast, there's still time to retroactively raise her grade.
I did fight that grade.
It's not too late.
Not too late.
I know. Only C I ever got. But we made it happen.
If she
We've
can
made
see you
community
now.
hubs. I know, right? Exactly. That's okay. It happened. So we brought it together. It just fueled my fire anymore. I was like, I will prove to you this is where we're going.
That's where you get your motivation still today, obviously.
It is absolutely where I still get my motivation.
Spite.
Don't tell me not to do something, so I will prove that it's possible. Like all these play spaces.
All right, Kendra, that was an excellent and informative conversation. We appreciate you coming on today.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you. You can always talk so well about what you do. And, we were talking earlier about what could you give a lecture on at the drop of a hat. This is this common thing online. And you said, I could pretty much give a lecture on, anything. Maybe not a lecture, but you could talk about something for 5 minutes at least. And you definitely did that today. I love hearing you talk about what you do and your thought process and just kind of what you bring to Timberland in that. So,
well, thanks. I'm very passionate about the topic in case that wasn't obvious.
We appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us on today's episode. Don't forget to follow or subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback helps us improve and reach more listeners.
You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Timberland Library. If you have any questions or comments, you can email us at trlpodcast@trl.org.
Original music is by our very own librarian and talented musician, Stefan, at the Yelm Branch.
Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep the conversation going. Thank you for being a part of the TRL community.